G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Trewin. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome, everyone. Today I'm interviewing Richard Triggs from Arete Executive based in Brisbane, Australia. Thanks for your time today, Richard.
It's a pleasure to be here, Troy. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. And when you're down in Hobart next, as we're talking about before we hit record, definitely going to grab a beer down at Hobart Brewing Company.
Sounds wonderful.
Let's start with how we know each other. Monique from Boost Media Agency put us in touch earlier this year. Thought they've sent us quite a few good guests. So I thought it'd be great to have you on, and really interesting business.
Great. Well, look, I have my own podcast that I've done over 200 episodes, and it's nice to be on the other side of the mic now and then and have a bit of a chat about what we've been up to. And I'm excited about some of the questions you're looking forward to asking because they're a bit different to the norm.
Yeah, I've been a guest on a few podcasts, not that many, but it's always a bit weird being on the other side of the mic. Tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
Okay, sure. So Arete Executive is the name of my business. Arete is a Greek word. It means the fulfillment of one's full potential. So when we were looking for a name for the business, we were typing into Google words like achievement and success and so on, and this word Arete came up, which we'd never heard before. Subsequent to that, now I think in Australia, there's an Arete wine company, an Arete fit-out company, an Arete coaching company. So it's become a little bit more widely used, but we are what you call a retained headhunter. So organisations engage us to go and headhunt very specific talent for them, typically in the mid-level leadership through to CEO and board space. And we work across essentially all industries, all over Australia. We do some international work, although not a tremendous amount, and across all role families. So it could be anything from an operations manager, a sales manager, a finance manager, etc., right through to CEOs and board directors. Whilst we do have some ASX top 100 clients, and for example, we have one that we've recruited over 250 roles for in the last 3 years, the majority of our clients are, I wouldn't say micro businesses, depending on how you define small to medium, businesses that are large enough that they have some kind of a leadership team. Perhaps, from 20 through to 200 employees seems to be our sweet spot. And we do a lot of work in regional Australia too, where typically organisations may find it more challenging to attract the talent that they need.
Yep, great. And how did you start out?
Well, to go way back, when I finished high school, I had grand aspirations of being a rock and roll star. And I'd been playing guitar in bands through high school. And so I toured for about 4 years as a professional musician. And then when I was, I guess around 22 or so, I was living in Melbourne, chasing a record deal. The deal fell through. And I sort of came to a realization that to be a successful musician, you had to, one, be very talented, and two, be very fortunate. So I rang my parents and I said, I think I need to come back to university and get a real job. And went back to uni, got a business degree, worked in corporate. And then in my early to mid 30s, I was doing an executive MBA, and the company that I was working for, the CEO, and that was a small to medium enterprise, the CEO had just taken equity in the business. There was no real opportunity for career pathing for me there. So I went back to a recruiter that I'd been a client of, and I said, I think it's time for me to find a new gig. And he said, have you ever thought about working in executive recruitment? So like most recruiters, I fell into the industry, not really having had any aspirations to be a recruiter prior to that. And I worked for, at the time, the biggest recruitment company in the world, then called TMP Worldwide, now called Hudson. I worked for them for a year, really enjoyed recruitment, really didn't enjoy their culture. So then I went and worked for probably the most successful small boutique recruitment agency in Queensland. I worked with them for 5 or so years. They grew significantly. I ended up being on their board as an executive director. And then I started my own business, Arete Executive, on the 1st of November, I beg your pardon, on the 1st of February 2009. So right in the height of the global financial crisis, for my sins, I decided that I would start a recruitment business. And people at the time said, "Oh, Richard, you're crazy." But as they say, fortune favors the brave. And 15 years later, we're still here. We've survived a GFC, a mining industry collapse, a global pandemic, now everything else that's going on in the world. It's been a pretty wild ride. Lots of good times, lots of very challenging times, and lots of great learnings along the way.
And how old were you back then in 2009, 15 years ago when you did
Oh, goodness. 41.
41? And before we move on, you've got a book that was launched or released a couple of months ago in August. Tell the audience a bit about that book.
Well, I wrote, I went and did a fantastic program back in 2014 called Key Person of Influence. And one of the goals of doing
That's
that
Daniel
program.
Priestley?
Yes, that's right. Daniel Priestley. Yep. They're now called Dent. And one of the goals of that program was for credibility was to write a book. So I wrote a book called Uncover the Hidden Job Market, How to Find and Win Your Next Senior Executive Role, which is very much aimed at the job seeker. And then I revised that book and released a new version of that in around October of last year. And then I decided that I wanted to write a book for the other side of the coin, being for the employer. So my new book is called Winning the War for Talent, how to attract and retain top performers. And it's very much aimed at, again, probably your audience, small to medium enterprise organizations that, are perhaps struggling to really attract the best people and may also be struggling to retain their top people. So it's a very practical guide written in a way that gives people some very simple techniques and tools that they can implement to greatly improve their ability to do those things.
Fantastic. We'll link through to both those books in the show notes. And it's such an important part of business, particularly for small business, that you look after. As we like to say, recruitment's the most important thing a manager does. I mean, if you've got a B or a C player on your bus or an arsehole, it just drags the growth down. It's frustrating. The owner has to work more hours. So it's such an important area. And a lot of owners have never really, swatted up on how to recruit well. And there also are some recruiters out there that aren't that good. So it's really excellent to hear that you're nailing this corner of the business.
Well, I think that it's like anything. Somebody owns a business. Typically, they're very skilled at what the business does, but it doesn't necessarily mean they've got the skills involved in both recruitment and retention. So the utilization of a recruitment company is important for some roles, but in the main, organizations, obviously recruitment's a regrettable spend. Nobody jumps out of bed excited about having to pay a recruiter. So the more of it you can do yourself, the better. It's just that most organizations haven't really paid a lot of attention to upskilling both themselves and their line managers in, well, how do I actually do this really well? For exactly the reasons that you just mentioned. If you have a great team, it means you can work on more strategic imperatives. You have greater work-life balance. Hopefully you're more profitable and you've got a great competitive advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have some key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth of the business over the last 15 years?
Sure. So it's pretty easy to say where we started from. It was zero. So I started the business with my wife, and that's a bit of an interesting story. But so my wife and I were both managing two different recruitment companies. She got pregnant and had our first child. And we thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to start a little mum and dad recruitment firm, and we'll have good work-life balance, and we'll be able to raise a family and have some fun and along the way. But of course, as that old saying goes, separating the boardroom from the bedroom proved to be very challenging for us, and our marriage didn't survive that. However, interestingly, after 5 years of being away from the business, she's just come back now as my chief operating officer and employee. So it's a very different dynamic, and there's probably a whole book in that. But anyway, coming back to your question, numbers. So, we started the business from scratch. Somebody said to me before I start a business to have $100,000, which would get me through that initial startup period. And it's great to say that really after about 3 to 4 months, we were cash flow positive, and we've remained that way for the entire period. The business grew from just the two of us to around 14 people up until around 2012, 2013. And what I found was that, and again, this might be a fairly typical story for both your clients and people listening to this podcast, is what I found was that I was working massive hours, predominantly in a very strategic business development role. I was bringing in all of the work. I had a team of about 14 people, and who I was paying, and yet my wife and I at the time worked out that the two of us were only taking about $80,000 a year out of the business combined. So we got the turnover to about 1.8 million, and yet we were only earning 40 grand each.
Jeez.
And so I said at the time, look, this is just it's just unrealistic to continue down this path. So I started to say to my team, look, you need to start to feed yourselves. And what we found was that people, pretty quickly decided that they'd rather be elsewhere. So the business contracted to about 4 or 5 people. At that point, my wife and I separated. She went to join a competitor. And since then, the business has fluctuated, not really so much on market conditions, but I've got to be honest, Troy, I'm 56 years old, and I really don't enjoy managing people. I love leading adults. I love having people on the team who take responsibility, and you can trust them to fulfill the responsibilities that they've committed to. But when I have to start to micromanage people, it really does my head in. So right as we stand now, I think we're at 10 FTEs, full-time equivalents.
Yep.
And our business has been growing. We've had a very successful time. COVID was, in fact, incredibly positive for us. And one of the reasons for that was prior to COVID, the majority of my clients were in Southeast Queensland because that's where I am. And, if people want to work with you, they want to shake hands and kiss babies and have coffees and do all that stuff. Suddenly, after that initial lockdown, we were working for clients all over Australia and, in fact, doing some international work. The work has continued to escalate. And so we're probably hiring on average 2 to 3 people a quarter. And we're having some excellent net growth in terms of staff. And from a revenue point of view, we're probably sitting between $2.5 to $3 million a year now. And I'm hoping that will probably grow to $3 to $4 million in revenue next year.
That's great, Richard. And back on the managing people thing, as we like to say, people are the hardest thing in small business and its greatest asset. And that's a big driver for why we launched our business transformation program. About half of our teachings in those courses and the one-on-one coaching over the 16 weeks is around people, like being a better leader as the owner of the business, and you as well as a manager and your other managers as well. Because we've just, like similar to recruitment, a lot of small business owners and their managers aren't given the training or tools or don't invest in themselves to be able to manage people better yet. It's so important.
I couldn't agree more. And you would think that larger corporates have got a better idea on how to do that. But I can tell you from my own experience, all of the issues and challenges that small to medium business owners face, big companies face, just on a bigger scale. Yeah, for sure.
When was the moment you felt like you had succeeded?
Look, I have my good days and my bad days. There's certainly been a few times along the 15-year journey, as they say, that I've gone, this is terrible. I need to give it all up and go back to being an employee. But I think I kind of realized I've come to the point of being unemployable. So there have been many moments in my career that I've felt that I've succeeded, and I think it's a little bit climbing a mountain. You get to the top of the mountain, you have that perfect view. I just watched a documentary about a woman who's climbed Mount Everest 10 times, but of course you've got to come back down. So you get to the top, you go, oh, I've succeeded at this point, but then something will happen, and it's for me, it's about remembering what that feeling is like and looking to replicate that feeling as often as possible.
What does success look like to you?
Well, I suppose it's changed over the years. When I was a younger man, I had great aspirations to be the CEO of a substantive business. And then when I started my company, I had an expectation or a desire that Arete Executive would be, a major player on the recruitment landscape. And then as I've gotten older, I've realized that success for me is having a great team, working with some excellent clients, earning enough money to have an enjoyable lifestyle. But I've become much more, I've simplified my desires a lot. Whereas previously I may have had these grand aspirations. Now, to pay for my kids' education and go on a great holiday a couple of times a year and just feel really grateful and delighted with the work that I'm doing is more than enough.
Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
Well, I think the number one thing is don't underestimate, especially in those early years, how hard it's going to be. I think that there's a lot of people who get into business because they think that they have the technical skills. A plumber starts a plumbing business, or an accountant starts an accounting firm, or whatever it might be. Richard, a recruiter, starts a recruitment firm, but understanding that just because you have the technical skills, it doesn't mean that you have the acumen to really take the business through to its fullest potential. And so for me, one of the things I've done is surround myself with great people. I've had coaches along the entire time. I've consistently looked to up my education and invest in myself in order to feel more confident that my business is sustainable.
So on the marketing front, then, so you've invested a bit of professional development around that, or have you let?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier, uh, I did that program, Key Person of Influence, which at the time was not a insignificant investment, not only in money, but also in time. At the moment, we have a virtual assistant based in the Philippines who's a marketing specialist. I've just appointed a creative director to work with me. I am constantly reading and looking at best practice as to what my competitors and other people are doing in our industry, both locally and nationally. But I think one of the things that I'm very good at is I love to get out and shake hands and kiss babies. And I think that for all the marketing that you can do as a small business person, nothing beats just getting out there regularly in front of your target customers and building strong relationships to ensure that you're getting that pipeline of income.
And how did you fund the business? You mentioned you had some savings there. You haven't taken investors along the way, or?
No, we have an overdraft through our bank, and other than that, we've not leaned on any kind of investment. It's not to say that we wouldn't in the future, but it hasn't been a priority for us to date.
If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
I think so because I really enjoy it, and I really enjoy the fact that my industry, the vast majority of recruiters are still trying to do what provide a recruitment solution the same way that they were 20 years ago. There's not been much innovation. There's certainly been a lot of innovation in terms of new technology like LinkedIn and things that have come along the way. But what I really enjoy is being a bit of a paradigm breaker and starting to look at new and innovative ways to deliver recruitment solutions that are a lot quicker and a lot cheaper. And so I suppose I could do that in other industries, but I'm having fun where I am.
Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
one of the things, I mentioned earlier that when I started the business with my wife, Fiona, uh, because of this sort of dynamic of being a married couple, we decided to get a third business partner, and we invited somebody in to the business. And I think within probably the first 3 months, I my intuition, well, both my brain and my heart told me that I'd made a poor decision, a poor hire. And yet I persisted with that person for 3 years.
Oh, Richard,
Uh,
the irony. You're a recruiter, and it's one of the most important recruitments you can do is your business partner.
oh, I know. Look, as the old saying, the cobbler's children have no shoes, right? So I recruited this guy in, and certainly through the recruitment process, I felt, very comfortable and confident that he had the skills that I required. But I think it was more a culture. It wasn't a competency issue. It was a cultural issue, um, and yet I persisted with this person in my business for 3 years. We brought in a board, we brought in coaching for him, and at the end of 3 years, it ended poorly, and it was a very expensive and distracting and emotionally challenging period. So I think one of the lessons that I've learnt, and certainly I talk about in my book, is hire well and fire fast. And I think that I've had to really swallow my own medicine in that regard. And that's not to say that's my only poor hire. I've certainly had a few along the way, but really, as a business owner, that was an incredibly stressful period. And as I say, very distracting. So I should have trusted my gut far earlier and said, this isn't working out, and allowed that person to go and move on and do other things in their life.
Yeah, it's always hard letting people go, especially business partners. And I've certainly made that mistake, held on to people and business partners far too long. Out of interest, did you have a shareholders agreement in place?
Yes, we did.
Oh,
So we had a very good shareholders agreement in place, and that protected us from what could have been a much more difficult departure than if we hadn't have had that. So I would definitely recommend paying a good lawyer to produce a good document, because without that, the implications could have been terrible.
yeah, totally agree. And a lot of people balk at the cost to get that shareholders agreement drawn up, but it is well worth every cent.
Oh, I think in every aspect of employment, your employment contracts, if you are going down the path of terminating somebody, engaging an employment lawyer that you know and trust, hopefully that is reasonably priced. It may be a few $1,000s at the beginning, but it could save you tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars down the track. So I utilize a lawyer in every element of my hiring and employment process.
What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
I think by nature, being a sales and marketing person, my not my Achilles heel, but the area of my business that I least enjoy is more the compliance, the financial side, and the particularly the IT and those kind of areas. I don't enjoy it. It's a necessary evil of being a business owner, and so again, getting the right people around me, a good big bookkeeper, a good accountant, a good outsourced IT provider, allows me to concentrate on what I prefer, which is those revenue generating activities.
Yep. So that answers the next question. What you've enjoyed least about managing fast growth?
Well, often if you're growing fast, it forces you to make decisions on the spur of the moment, which you may come to regret down the track. So, again, that's saying make haste slowly, in trying to be as considered as possible with decisions along the way, particularly around people. That's can be very challenging.
What do you love most about growing a small business?
Oh, I think it's fun. I take a lot of, this may sound a bit egotistical, and I don't really mean it to be, but, I take a lot of my self-worth from the fact that I've built a great brand. I'm highly regarded for my brand. Many people, regard me as a trusted advisor in relation to their businesses, particularly around the people element. And it's very gratifying to have that personal brand of being happy and helpful.
What has been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
Well, most recently, it's been I've now brought a chief operating officer into the business who I really trust, who's actually my ex-wife,
Mhm.
and it's being able to take my hands off the wheel and being able to say, okay, she's here now. I need to give her the space to run that part of the business the way that she chooses to, because if I keep trying to interfere, then I'm not going to get what I truly want, which is the ability to move into doing more of what I'd love.
The number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
Prioritizing what is important over what is urgent
Yep.
and managing your time accordingly. So it's very easy to be highly reactive. And whilst that may solve immediate issues, if you are going to have a sustainable growth business over the longer term, it's being able to make sure you're putting your attention on those mission critical growth tasks rather than constantly putting out fires.
Do you need a guide on how to build your own money printing marketing machine? Do you feel like marketing is a mysterious art, only cracked by a chosen few? Fear not, we get it. Mastering marketing can be like taming a dragon. Download a copy of the Marketing Funding Flywheel ebook, which has 41 pages packed with over 50 tools and tips for your business. Let's get into it. Head to growasmallbusiness.com. We have plenty of resources waiting for you in the footer of our website.
Perfect question for you. Can you talk to how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening?
Well, as I said, we're probably adding 2 to 3 people to the team a quarter at the moment. And what I've come to learn is to obviously look for people who have the technical competency, but much more to look at whether they are a cultural fit for our business. A mistake that I made a couple of years ago, I was recruiting a general manager into my business, and I interviewed this guy, and he came across fantastically. He had excellent experience. Was extraordinarily convincing. I found out from the market that there were, let's just say, he'd had a checkered past, and I asked him about that, and he explained to me what had happened in this situation, and convinced me that what I'd heard was not really true. And I hired this fellow, and anyway, it turned out to definitely be true. And I was then put in a position where I had to terminate him. I think one of the biggest things to do, and I talk about this in my book, and certainly for myself, is be really clear. What does success look like in the role?
Yep.
What are those key deliverables you need this person to achieve in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? Turn those into a series of quantifiable key deliverables. And at the first evidence that those things are not being achieved, is to have the authority to be able to demand performance. And again, if the performance is not there, to make a choice as to whether you need to move that person out of your business. One of the things I talk about is it's very difficult for a business owner to find that balance between love and accountability. If I love my team too much, but I don't hold them accountable enough, they get soft and underperform. If I hold them too accountable, but I don't love them enough, they get brittle, and they either become very self-serving or they exit. And so for me, it's a constant looking in the mirror to say, am I actually able to sit in that sweet spot of love and accountability as a leader? Because as soon as I stray too much in either direction, my business starts to wobble and underperform.
Yeah, and on the job descriptions, I'm flawed. And obviously, we work in the small business space, 5 to 30 team members, but I'm still flawed at how businesses get to a point where, one, they don't have job descriptions, like exactly what you said before. What does success look like in this role? It needs to be clearly defined and simply defined, because then the other end of the extreme is the job descriptions are just garbage. It's 5 to 10 pages long. You got part of your ops manual stuck in there, part of your recruitment, etc. It's just amazing to me that small business owners don't invest their time to roll out a very clear job description. There's a good mate of mine, a tech company. They were about 20 team members at that point. They asked for a bit of help, and this is many years ago, and I said, well, show me your org chart and your job descriptions. And the 3 founders just blinked, stared at me. I said, how the fuck did you guys get a team of 20 and growing fast? And people don't know what they own, what they don't own, what they're responsible for, their KPIs. They're running around bumping into each other, falling, all over the place. So within 6 months, they sorted that. But I'm just still amazed how many small business owners just don't do something as simple as that.
Well, once again, that is definitely not limited to small business. We recruit right up to CEO level. We recruit for ASX top 100 companies, and I would say 95% of their position descriptions are absolutely rubbish. They are just a regurgitation of a fairly, what I call, a lot of motherhood statements.
Yep.
Sales manager, we want somebody to manage the sales team to achieve budget and ideally have this kind of background and so on. Instead of being really clear, you see, the thing is, you want to hire people who've done it before, they've done it well, and they're motivated to do it again. So unless you know exactly what you want them to do, how do you make sure that you recruit the person who's done it before? And the other issue is that if you're outsourcing your recruitment to either an internal person within your team or an external recruiter, how are they meant to recruit for you what you need unless you explicitly understand what you need and it's documented? And it extraordinarily rare, Troy, at any level of business that companies do that well.
And so is that something you help them out with, is to clarify that position description or job description up front?
Absolutely. So we use a recruitment methodology developed by an American guy named Lou Adler, who was an engineer, and he wrote this fantastic book called Hire with Your Head. Anybody who does a lot of hiring, I would highly recommend it. And essentially, he said the best predictor of future performance is past performance. Again, find somebody who's done it well and is motivated to do it again. And so what we do is we put together a document called a performance profile. Now, the performance profile is not instead of a position description, it's as well as. So the performance profile would say, okay, Troy, so you're hiring a new sales manager. In 3 months, what do they actually have to achieve for you to be delighted with their employment? And really getting clear on what those key things are. And if you want me to give a very quick example, so let's say we have 3 companies, all of whom are looking to recruit a sales manager. They're in a similar industry, and we go through this exercise. Company number 1, what does this person need to achieve? Well, our former sales manager was a very Machiavellian leader. The team are highly disengaged. We're at risk of losing good people. It's having an impact on our client retention and spend. First 3 months, we want our new sales manager to throw their arm around the team, give them a big hug, rebuild the culture, rebuild the vision. And if they could achieve that within 3 months and retain all of these people, that would be awesome. Second company says, we are under incredible pressure from our competitors who are now sourcing product from India and China. We want our new sales manager within 3 months to be able to give us a strategy to reduce our cost of goods sold by 25%. If we can't do that, then we're in big trouble. Third company says, we've got this fantastic new product. We want to launch it into a new market. We're really excited about the future, but we don't know we don't have a strategy for it. So what we want the new sales manager to do, first 3 months, look at the market, identify the lowest hanging fruit, really see where can we take this to. If we could achieve $1 million in sales in this new product within 12 months, that would be awesome. So same role, same type of company, very similar position description, 3 very different requirements. And if you're not really clear about that, then you may interview somebody. And what I talk about in my book is when you're interviewing people, you say, in your more recent experience, let's say in the last 3 to 5 years, what's a key achievement that you're most proud of, that you'd hang your hat on and say, this is why I'm bloody good at my job? And if the candidate says, oh, I launched this new product into this new market and was so successful and, we had these tremendous wins, that's awesome if that's what you want. But if you need somebody to reduce cost of goods sold by 25%, they're probably not the right person. It doesn't mean that they're not a good sales manager. It's just that they're not the right person for your business at this point in time.
Yeah.
So again, especially if you're outsourcing the recruitment, if the person who's responsible for doing that recruiting doesn't explicitly know what you need, how are they going to present you the candidates that have done it before, done it well, and are motivated to do it again? It's a very simple process. But again, the reality is that very few companies do it, even at CEO level. I'll meet with a board and I'll say, okay, you're just about to spend $500,000 on this CEO. What do you want them to achieve? And they go, that's a good question. What do you think, John? What do you think, Mary? And it's baffling, but that's where utilizing a good recruitment company, where the recruiter has got the ability to be a trusted advisor rather than just an order taker, can be very beneficial.
What are some of the things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
Well, that's a really good question, especially currently, because a lot of companies are challenged from a culture point of view with people wanting to work a lot more from home. So, how do you build a good culture when your workforce may be, as it is in my case, my workforce all work from home all around Australia. So it's making sure that there is consistency of message. It's making sure that the leaders walk the talk, and it's bringing the team together regularly so that they can share stories, a little bit like we are today. I remember when I got my first job at James Hardie when I came out of university, we used to sit with all of the older team members, and on a Friday we'd all go to the pub and have lunch, and they'd share their war stories, and there'd always be somebody that you could turn around and say, Mary, I've got this situation, what should I do? Whereas a lot of companies now, that simply doesn't exist. So as a result, trying to keep that culture alive and positive is more difficult. But I think culture comes down to people want to do a great job. They want to be accountable. They want to be recognized and rewarded for achievement. Also, people are looking at how their peers are being treated. And I think a point you made earlier, Troy, if you've got somebody in the team who's underperforming or is a poor cultural fit, then as a leader, if you don't deal with that, the ripple effect of that across the broader team, is substantive. And if they see that, Fred's getting away with doing a crap job or being an idiot, it's imperative as a leader that we either get Fred to drink the Kool-Aid, or Fred's got to go and find something else to do.
Tell the audience how you've handled balance.
Look, I've always been somebody who has a strong spiritual sort of drive. So earlier in my career, I lived 1 week in a month for 4 years in a Buddhist monastery. So I was working in at a very sort of high-powered corporate job, earning fantastic money. And then 1 week in a month, I'd go and live with these monks and the nuns who had literally, had some robes and not much else. And so it was fantastic to sort of have that experience of seeing how happy they were, to come to a realization that it's not just all about titles and remuneration and so on. Now I go and I make sure I go and do some kind of personal development / spiritual retreat at least once a year. And also I make sure that I take regular breaks. So as a business owner, it's difficult to say, oh, I'm going to go away on holidays for 4 weeks. But it's fairly easy to say I'm going to go away for a 4-day long weekend, once a quarter or even more frequently, because otherwise it can become all consuming. Literally the first thing I do, I wake up in the morning is I check my emails. And then at nighttime, the last thing I do before I go to bed is I check my emails. So when you're turned on, in that sort of heightened state, it's really, really important to have the space, and going and doing something like a Vipassana, silent meditation retreat, or experiencing something which is completely outside of, your normal professional life. Well, that certainly works very well for me. I'd love to tell you that I meditate every day and I run 10 kilometers and, I only eat raw vegetables. But part of what I do is I love entertaining, and I love that aspect of my role. It's not so good for my masculine, 6-pack figure, but I just enjoy it. So I think trying to deny myself those things. So I run a number of, I run the Brisbane Long Lunch Club. I run other lunches. I run CEOs for breakfasts. And so whilst that's still work, it's a very enjoyable part of my work.
How much professional development have you invested in yourself?
Well, gosh, I would hate to put a number on it, but it would be in the hundreds of thousands. But for example, at the moment, I have a book writing and professional speaking coach. I have for want of a better term, a life coach, and I have an accountability coach. So just, if I just think about that just once, it's probably $5,000 a month invested in just those 3 people. But I know that the upside of that is that, so much more than just, well, am I getting a 5-time return on investment or so? It's keeping me sane. It's keeping me energized. It's keeping me passionate about my business. I'm getting shit done. So coming back to your question, how much have I invested? A lot.
A lot. Now, you've mentioned coaches. Have you had mentors along the way?
Well, certainly. And I think that, when I was working prior to the recruitment industry, I had a boss, Peter King, and he was an absolutely fantastic boss and a tremendous mentor for me. And then when I went and worked in the recruitment industry for 5 years, I worked for a company called Davidson Recruitment, and one of the owners of that, Bruce Davidson, was a fantastic mentor of mine. So mentoring doesn't necessarily have to be a formal engagement. Likewise, it could be somebody within your own business. It could be somebody outside of your business. The difference, I suppose, in my mind between a mentor and a coach is a mentor's done it before, and they're sharing their own experience, whereas a coach is not necessarily, they haven't done it before, but they know how to coach you to do it. So I've always had both in my life, and again, because I work in recruiting for successful small to medium enterprise, and largely my relationship is with the managing director or the chair, I learn so much just through osmosis. My clients teach me a lot about my business, which is wonderful.
Do you have a board of directors or advisors?
We've had a board of directors in the past, particularly when we had that third business partner. But really, I got to a point where the board and I both agreed that the investment in having a board probably was better spent investing in having quality coaches rather than a formal board.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it may be something that we reconsider in the future, but I haven't had a formal board for probably the last 8 or 10 years.
All right, Richard, one of our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
Remaining positive and just keeping. I think Malcolm Gladwell talks about the dip. You get really excited about something and your energy is really high, and then you suffer a few knocks, and suddenly your energy really dips. And I don't know what the statistics are. You probably do, Troy, but I imagine that a very high percentage of people who start small businesses end up going back to being an employee because they just can't keep the energy and the motivation to see it through. So it's just persist. Yeah, keep your eye on the prize and just persist, even if it takes 15 years.
Yeah, that's right. Persistence is key. I think it's 80 to 90% of small businesses go out of business within 5 years. People shut up shop and go back to getting a job. And I think it was Seth Godin that wrote The Dip. I read that years ago.
Oh, that's right. It was too, yeah.
Favorite business book which has helped you the most?
Well, certainly from a recruitment technical perspective, Lou Adler's High with Your Head is a fantastic book. And even if you're not a recruitment professional, I would strongly recommend reading that, of course, as well as my own. But I actually find that, being in business is about relationships. And so a lot of my skills as a business leader haven't necessarily come from reading a business book, is perhaps from reading another book. So a book that's been extremely influential for me is a book called Awareness by Anthony DeMello. And Anthony DeMello was a Indian Jesuit priest, and he wrote this absolutely beautiful book about, communication. And there are 3 precepts, or I think that's the right word, that he talks about, is 1, be the first to say sorry, 2, include the excluded, and 3, always return love for hate. And you go, well, that's not really business, Richard. But I find that if I live those principles in my business life, and I trust in the universe that if I'm happy and helpful, I will be looked after, it certainly worked very well for me.
Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
Look, there are lots of different podcasts that I listen to. Again, I probably now listen more to entertaining or world events type podcasts rather than strictly business ones. But again, going back to the Key Person of Influence program, not that I have any involvement in them and haven't for quite a number of years, I found that program, I've done an undergraduate degree, I've done an MBA. I found that program was incredibly a step change for me. And the other thing I constantly say to people is go and do Toastmasters. Toastmasters really gives you the confidence to be a good speaker and to learn to speak on your feet. And I think as a business leader, that is a critically important tool.
One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business, is it Toastmasters you just mentioned?
No, I would say rather than perhaps a tool, it's just making sure that you've got a great team of people around to support you. Have a great coach, have a great bookkeeper, have a great accountant, people who can really just help to carry the burden. So rather than feeling that you've got to carry everything on your shoulders yourself, by having that support team, okay, sure, it costs a bit of money, but the benefit far exceeds the cost.
Finally, my favorite question. What would you tell yourself on day 1 of starting out 15 years ago?
Never, ever, ever go into business with your romantic partner. Those people who can do it successfully, I absolutely take my hat off to them. Where I've seen it work is where there is a very clear delineation of responsibility. But my own experience was less than ideal. And I think because, we both came from managing recruitment businesses, we were both trying to run the show, and it was just business all the time. And romance and parenthood, unfortunately, just took second place to our business relationship. Now that we're back in business together, but we're not in a romantic relationship, it's fantastic. I couldn't have asked for a better person to come back into my business, and Fiona's doing a superb job. But my advice would be try and keep family and business separate.
Well, you're not going to like this stat, Richard, that I read earlier this year. Obviously, the divorce rates are over 50%, but those people that are in business together, those life partners that are in business together, the divorce rate is only 10%.
Right. Well, I wonder if that's because they feel financially enmeshed and the cost of separation is just too extreme. But again, look, different strokes for different folks. If you can make it work, all power to you.
Well, thanks very much for your time today, Richard. I really enjoyed our chat. Congratulations to you and Fiona, now your ex-wife, going from 2 up to 14 team members, back down to 10, and adding 2 or 3 people a quarter, and helping many businesses, small and big, out there get the right team members on their bus.
Well, thank you, Troy. I appreciate the positive feedback, and it's been great to chat to you.
Great. I look forward to having a beer with you in the sun down at Hobart Brewing Company.
Excellent. I'll be down there. I'll definitely be there before the end of the year.
Great.
And for our audience, we'd greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc., so more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.